Hi, my name is Henry Baltazar. I'm a research director of storage at S&P Global Market Intelligence, and thank you for joining us today. For today's discussion, we'll be talking about a recent paper that we worked on together with Veeam. uh, the title of that being a Buyer's Guide for Microsoft 365 Data Protection. And for today's discussion, I'm joined today by Rick Vanover. How's it going, Rick?
Hey Henry, I'm doing great. I'm on the road. Apologize for the little Jedi glow going on, but really happy to collaborate with you here today. Henry and I have crossed paths here at Veeam and his research across his career. Really happy to highlight some of his findings. For those watching, Henry's one of the best, so I'm really excited for what we're going to talk about here today.
Thanks so much for the compliments. Always love working with Veeam, and this is going to be a great discussion because I think this is one of the top pain points that we're seeing from organizations today. A lot of organizations are really struggling with data protection. And as for today's agenda, I'm going to start off the first half of the presentation talking a bit about what are some of the key challenges I'm seeing in regards to data protection based on what I've seen on our survey findings from the past year and early this year. Next section, we'll be diving deeper into M365 data protection and what type of features and capabilities you should be looking for as you evaluate these different offerings and solutions. After that, we'll go into a bit of a discussion and demo led by Rick, and then we'll end things off with some questions and answers. So going into the session, yeah, one of the key things we're looking at is what are some of these key challenges for data protection. If you're on this call today, then none of this should be news to you. Unfortunately, from our research, what we're seeing is outages are not only are they quite common, the vast majority of organizations have experienced outages, but what's more alarming to me is the fact that the mean cost of these outages continues to rise year after year, going from 1.56 million in 2022 up to 2.33 million in the last survey that we did at the end of 2024. When we look at these things, I think the other thing that scares me is like nearly half of the reported outages are now costing over $1 million. And one thing also to highlight here, when I'm talking about outages, I'm not just talking about service outages like the cloud being down or SaaS being down. We're talking about all causes of outages, which also include things like security incidents such as ransomware, and also other things that come to mind like network outages and other power outages and other things like that. So when we're talking about outages, it is a broader scope of things that create these different type of outages. But I think the other thing we have to keep in mind is when you look at these outages, it's not just the raw cost that you start seeing in terms of loss of data, loss of productivity, but we are also seeing other implements, other business metrics that are being affected. Some organizations are saying that they're seeing less customer loyalty as a result of this. A lot of them are seeing, hey, this has really hurt our marketing and our perception of our company because we are out. So there are a lot of other things you have to start thinking about in terms of what happens to the true cost of an outage. I think another thing we're starting to see is more and more organizations are looking to use third-party cloud when possible for their implementations. While we do see that there's around 30% or so of organizations that want to keep their data protection and backup capabilities in-house, that's clearly the minority now. Most organizations today want to use public cloud in some way or use a service provider to be able to offload some of their responsibilities in doing this. I think the other thing we're seeing is when we ask organizations about which platforms they need to protect and what's important for them, 2/3 of the organizations in our survey said that they're looking for specifically looking for M365 as a top SaaS platform that needs data protection. And you would expect the other usual suspects as well, such as Salesforce and other things like that. Rick, what are you seeing from your perspective? Does this jive with what you're seeing with your customers? Are they asking for the same things? What are you seeing so far?
Well, it's definitely consistent with what we see in the market. And I'd say, especially to the first point of outages, you name it, cybersecurity incidents, administrator errors, but also things like fire, flood, and blood. The reality is, Henry, that when incidents and outages happen, believe it or not, one of the most critical instruments to resume that is communications. So, a Teams call or emails, and then access to, maybe some of the critical data in OneDrive. This type of stuff becomes quite critical, more than just the service itself, but kind of a bigger picture. So, yeah, and especially the trends at the bottom definitely aligns to what I see in the market.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And it's kind of sad. I mean, we think about it, a lot of people have invested in these capabilities, but the thing is, if you're not running them the right way, and if you don't have all your ducks lined up in a row, the worst thing is to be able to make that investment and not get not get back the resiliency you're looking for. So, clearly, I think that's why it's important to look at these things and understand the true capabilities as you evaluate the different platforms as you go forward. Because at the end of the day, time is money, and the longer you're out, the more expensive these cost of outages are going to be, the more of a negative business impact these are going to be in terms of the reputation of your company, or even the emergence of maybe even SLA penalties for being down, especially if you're in a highly regulated type industry. So a lot of things to keep in mind, but I think everybody on the call can understand that, and this is why we need to spend time looking at these type of capabilities going forward and improving them. The other thing that continues to be an issue is the understanding of the shared responsibility model. To this day, I still see a lot of, it's kind of shocking. I still talk to a lot of end users, and we still see customers that don't think they have to protect their SaaS and cloud workloads, which is crazy. While you may think, okay, it's in the cloud, I'm not responsible for the servers, the hard drives, the network, blah blah blah. There's a lot of other things that could go wrong with workloads running in the cloud that you need to be able to protect yourself from. So for things like, for example, like what happens if it's an accidental deletion? What happens if it's an intentional deletion because you have a disgruntled employee? What happens if it's a security type incident? There's a lot of different things we have to start thinking about, and because of these things, I think that highlights why there's a shared responsibility model. And then specifically, when we look at the shared responsibility model, is when you're evaluating these offerings, you as an organization have to go and think for yourselves, how much responsibility do we want to take or control, and how much are we willing to offload? And we'll be talking about this in a second, but the different deployment models will give you a little bit of a flexibility as to how you deploy these things and which responsibilities you want to have, whether it's your team having all responsibility, or in some cases you're offloading it to a managed service provider or one of these other partners who can alleviate you from some of these burdens. I think as we start looking at these things, we're starting to see more organizations investing in enhancing their data protection strategies and also working with third-party backup solutions to be able to handle this issue. Another issue as we go back into this, uh, today we're going to be mostly focusing on the bad side of the market, but I think what we're looking at here is, for many organizations, depending on what state they are in and what experience they have, they may choose one of these other three types of offerings. For in particular, if you're an enterprise or mid-sized company that already has experience doing backup software, already has some infrastructure in terms of server storage and whatnot to be able to run this, you may want to go with the traditional backup type software deployment. Other organizations, they may want to go with especially if they're just trying to protect a couple of accounts or two, they may want to go with a backup as a service type thing where they can be more granular about adding these capabilities. And then finally, for some organizations that want to offload the most amount of the workload here, that's when you start looking at managed BaaS and those capabilities, being able to get help for that in terms of assistance to make sure that everything's running consistently, and also when there is a catastrophic type of event, you have help to be able to do these things. Rick, what's your take on this in terms of obviously you play in all three of these things? Do you agree with these types of assessments, or how do you feel the market's shifting from your point of view?
Well, I do agree with the assessment. The only thing I would add is, if you look at in the Veeam example, if we were having this conversation a year and a half ago, we would really only have two of these three options. And, some of the new priorities have added the third. But I'll go one step further. Customers are asking us to do these full-blown, managed services. And then when you look at the market, and they even have really smart analysts like Henry telling us that we should do this type of stuff. Like even the analyst community is telling us that from the product side, this would be a pretty solid growth pattern. But what I've really kind of taken away the net is there is no one size fits all. And when
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at, small organizations, some of the largest, and everything in between, you cannot come in with a one size fits all. So this freedom of choice, this modes of operation, absolutely becomes a priority, especially when you think about, TCO, standardization, data sovereignty, some of those other things come into play too. But I love, right, where we are right now, being able to give organizations those types of choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, final recommendation on this slide in particular, make sure as you're looking at the different platforms you're evaluating, make sure they have the different options because you never know how your requirements may change. And also, especially if you're dealing with a really large company, one geo may be different from others. You may have a mix of these different things potentially, depending on availability of cloud or availability of service providers. So again, it's important to have that kind of flexibility going forward as you look at these different solutions. I'll go into the next section. We'll be diving a little bit more into M365 data protection and what are the key capabilities you should be looking for. To me, when we start looking at this, in this first section, we're talking about backup flexibility. Clearly one of the key things you hear about that's important is the location of that backup. Of course, when we start thinking of things like the 3-2-1 rule, you obviously want to make sure you have a backup location that's geographically far away from the primary data set. Obviously, that's going to be important just in case there's a fire or anything like that, any type of geographic type of incident. But also in terms of compliance, for many organizations that have data sovereignty issues, the location of the backup is also going to wind up becoming an issue. Another thing people should look for is making sure that there is flexibility in the backup selection. Does the tool you're using, does it have the ability to create separate policies for different users? Does it have the ability to create separate policies for different workloads? Because it's not going to be a one size fits all for every workload or for every customer or every user within your environment. So having that flexibility is going to be very important because you may want to have a more stringent policies for more aggressive backups, especially if it's a user that winds up creating a lot of unique data for example. The other thing we have to start looking at is having flexible scheduling, both to make it easy and also to make sure it's matching the data loss requirements that you're trying to enforce within your organization. Another element we should also be thinking about is retention times. Obviously that shouldn't be too much of a stretch, in terms of when you start thinking about backups have always had this type of capability. But again, you should also be thinking about this longer term in terms of what do we do for the longer sets of retention? What type of environment should we be using for that? That's going to continue to be a big problem. And the final thing, and another thing that's really important, is making sure that you have immutable storage management or some kind of immutable storage within the environment. That's becoming a really, really key capability because, a lot of the attackers now have gotten smarter. They know that they're not, they know that the last line of defense, they know that the final safety net is your backups, and those backups have become targets. So we need to make sure we're implementing the right types of things, right types of capabilities here to make sure that those repositories are safe and that nobody can delete those to ensure that you can do a recovery when you need to have to do a major recovery from a catastrophic type of incident. Anything you want to add here, Rick?
Well, Henry, I just love that the word flexible is in here twice.
Mm-hmm.
And true story, I was debriefing with a story from one of our customers protecting 90,000 M365 users. And this blew me away, Henry. They need to keep the data for 99 years. And from their kind of their own internal requirements. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, I've always said you can retain this data forever, but now we have a real one that needs to do it. I'm working my magic, and Edward will like this, trying to get this customer story elevated to be presented up at Veeam on, because I think that this flexibility story, that's an extreme example, okay? But I think that the flexibility, because the rules may change around you. That's the one thing I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people might overlook. Oh, we're a bank now, or we acquired this and we're in healthcare, and that changes a lot of things. So I think organizations need to keep that flexibility really close to their heart.
Yeah, I would agree with Rick. I mean, key word is flexibility. Make sure that you can choose a solution that you can tailor to what you need. Yeah, because again, not everybody's going to have the super platinum backup every couple minutes type of thing. Not every user is going to need that, and not every company is going to want to pay that level for every single customer. So again, it's important to have that flexibility to make sure that the policies are matching what your true requirements are, and that in effect is also going to save a lot on your cost. And that's the other big issue in terms of storage and data protection these days is how do we make sure that we're reducing cost both on a capex level, but also on an opex level. We need to make these things easier as well because we just don't have money to throw to add more and more personnel to be able to run these things. And so, again, ease of use is no longer ease of use is no longer a luxury. It's actually a key requirement that we have to have going forward. And going into the recovery side, again, as you'd expect, you need to have flexible restoration options. Not every single restoration is going to be okay. We're going to bulk restore a couple hundred laptops. Well, of course, that's going to happen on a really bad day, especially if you have a ransomware incident. Not every recovery is going to be like that. Sometimes you need to have a just more lightweight recovery because your CEO accidentally deleted a file or accidentally corrupted a file or any of those type of things. So when you start looking at these recovery options, you definitely need to make sure you're choosing tools that have that granularity so you can do what you need to do as fast as possible and get your stakeholder up and running as quickly as they can. The other thing is also restore location flexibility. Maybe the secondary site you were at is no longer accessible. You may need to move it to another laptop or may need to move the data to another location. But having that type of capability is going to be important as well, especially as we start dealing with potentially geographic type disasters like a fire or whatnot. Another key element, another thing to deeply look at as you're evaluating these platforms is what kind of application support do they have? Yeah, obviously, M365 is always adding new capabilities, new applications, but again, start looking at some of these things. Are they, for example, are they protecting Teams the way you need it to be protected? Are they protecting other elements within the infrastructure the way you need, based on your requirements? That's going to be another key thing to look at as you evaluate these platforms. Again, also with backup, search is going to be very important as well. You need to be able to find find data locations after restore operations. Because again, what's the point of restoring something if you can't find it? Also it's going to be these restore and search capabilities in general are going to be very important as well as we start doing more larger scale data management and as organizations try to get more control of their data to be able to extract business value out of it. And the other thing, another key thing, also especially not only from the stakeholder side, but also from the operation side, is the ability to have self-service restoration. Let's face it, on a Saturday morning, if I made a mistake, might not be able to get to the 9 to 5 IT person. It'd be nice to have a self-service restoration type capability where I can go personally and pull the file I need and get on with my day and get on with my work. I think that's going to continue to be a key capability going forward. Anything you want to add on the recovery operations,
Yeah,
recovery options?
yes. Self-service is where it's at. I mean, I'm going to put this right in the terms of a decision maker or, an admin and 365 admin. That's a help desk ticket you don't have to deal with. That is a call you don't have to take on the weekend or at night or any other time you don't want to do it. So I think that's a real important one. And oh, look, my favorite word, flexible, is back in there. So I like that as well. So these are really strong points, Henry. I'm just like shaking my head the whole way through, liking them all. So nothing else to add. But putting it in terms of the people who administer these solutions to save them time, that's always in season.
Yeah, that's the key word for the webinar, flexibility. Flexibility not only gets the job done, but it'll save you money. So that's the other thing to keep in mind as you look at these offerings. You need to have that flexibility because there's no point in doing bulk restore if you don't have to. Why would you spend all that extra time doing it? Make sure you have the right tools to fit the job that you have at hand. Another key thing we're looking at, obviously, security is always going to be a big thing. So you need to make sure whatever offering you have is going to have the basics like multi-factor authentication for security to make sure that the admin accounts and all the other sensitive accounts are protected. You're also, as I mentioned before, you need to have that immutable storage to prevent against accidental and intentional deletions or intentional corruptions of those data sets, because again, that's your safety net. And another thing that's really interesting, a big trend I think we have to keep an eye on is how a lot of these new data protection platforms are starting to integrate more proactive ransomware detection. I think that's a key important trend. And I think it's something a lot of organizations need to look into. When we look at some of our security research, we're seeing that a lot of security professionals are not able to respond to a lot of their daily alerts. They're just being overwhelmed with alerts. So the ability for the backup people and other people involved to be able to see some of these potential issues, that's going to be great because the faster you can react to these things, the more higher chance you have of avoiding having an outage. Or if it is an outage, you know that you're protected enough to be able to bring yourselves back after that type of outage. Anything you want to add on the security side?
Well, I think part of the security consideration is, really across all of these that I want to add, Henry, is I do understand that our technology world is an information overload, alert fatigue, whatever you want to call it. And I think the commodity that we can save here by taking a fresh approach, which I'll talk about here in a second, is simply time. We can save some time in when something happens. First of all, who's dealing with it? How is it managed? And little things like upgrade windows or vulnerability patches to prevent bigger problems like ransomware or things like that. When we think about this compounding level of risk and things like that, we should always keep these high priority. But yeah, MFA, great idea. Keeping these backup data sources safe and actually, here's the other thing. There's shout out to Eric on the stream here watching. Ransomware happens in this data source too. I've got some internal stories that we've seen here at Veeam. And this data source, Microsoft 365, especially when you think about some of the synchronization across endpoints, the consideration is real here. So all of these are important. It's kind of like choosing your favorite child. Can't really pick it. So I agree with everything yet again.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's not just that we have to have all these things. Again, it also matters how the vendor is implementing these things or how the solution is implementing these things and what is their roadmap going forward. And I'm sure you can get a lot of information from that. But again, things to keep in mind going forward because the more of these things we can do, the more peace of mind you're going to have, and that in effect is another key thing here because we are trying to reduce operational cost while also reducing risk. So again, these are key things to look at from a security side. And now up to my final slide. When I start looking at future considerations, there's a couple of key things that we look at that I think organizations should think about as they're evaluating their different providers. I think the first thing, probably obvious, is how much of a relationship does that provider have with the SaaS provider? I mean, especially if we're talking in this case, we're talking about M365 being the Microsoft being the SaaS provider. Again, those relationships and those strong ties are going to be very important because again, the data protection players are at the whims of those SaaS providers. The SaaS providers make the rules. So the more they can keep in touch with them, the better they can work with those different SaaS providers. The better they're going to have, and the better data protection resiliency they're going to have from those types of offerings. Another key thing to think about is broad platform coverage. Though we are focused on M365 for this particular presentation, I'm sure many of you on the line have lots and lots of different platforms to protect in your environment. And I think the key thing to think about here is if you choose a platform that has broad coverage, for other maybe SaaS platforms, maybe it's something like Salesforce, for example, or other type of physical, virtual, or even container-based workloads that have to be protected, being able to centralize that capability and be able to use unified tools and other type of capabilities, that's going to help you out in terms of not only reducing your capex but also your opex, and also make things a lot easier to run because you'll have more consistency if you can be able to rely on a vendor that can provide a lot of the different coverage for all of your different assets that have to be protected. Another key thing to think about is also you need to try to avoid vendor lock-in when possible. Some of the providers out there will have solutions that have integrated hardware and integrated software or have appliances or things like that. In some cases, you may want to do that, especially if your organization's used to doing those things. But in other cases, you may want to have more flexibility, especially in this day and age when we have a lot of workloads moving back and forth between on-premises and cloud. In some cases, if you have on-premises, you may want to do that in that type of environment. But for others, what we're seeing is a lot more organizations want to leverage cloud because cloud and other types of offerings. Because again, it's the best policy is to make sure you have an offsite copy somewhere else, and cloud is a nice way of doing that as an extension to what you're doing on the on-premises side of things. Anything you want to add on the future consideration side, Rick?
Yeah, I want to dig into the broad platform coverage. And I think this is an area where I think the market should look horizontally, but also vertically. You mentioned, across the data center estate, the SaaS estate, and everything in between, but also make sure it's complete in that regard. And I get a lot of feature requests, and Henry, we've even spoke privately about when Veeam features are being born, giving you the heads up and stuff. This is one area that, in the market you should, push and ask for other features, both broad and deep. And I think that's a real important point, I think, when we look at the big picture. Because again, data fatigue, alert fatigue, just data center sprawl, cloud sprawl, SaaS sprawl. There's all kinds of sprawl, y'all. It happens, is my take.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And again, that consolidation, that capability, that's going to be valuable. That's going to save you money and save you time, and hopefully make your operations a little bit smoother by having that type of consistency in the organization. And with that, I'm going to kick things over to Rick on his side.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Henry. Just give me a verbal that I did steal the share. Okay, looks like I did because I see that I'm sharing the screen now. So I want to give you a word from our sponsor. So as Henry and I started the content, I'm Rick Vanover from Veeam. I want to give you a quick look, and I am going to do a quick demo as well of Veeam Data Cloud from Microsoft 365. It's one of the flagship parts of our portfolio. And the good news is everything Henry talked about aligns really well to what we're doing in the market. So Veeam Data Cloud from Microsoft 365 is really making it simple to protect this critical data. Veeam protects over 23.5 million mailboxes in M365. We are the most deployed backup solution in the space. We've seen a few things. And so you're really building on a product that's been in the market since late 2016. And I'm personally in my 15th year here at Veeam, and I've seen all kinds of things come and go. But this product is really turning heads. And then in this model of Veeam Data Cloud is really resonating to the market. To Henry's data point, about 2/3 of the market want to consume protection as a service. This is where it's at. The other thing I want to highlight is that it's a modern, intuitive, and secure offering. The services are really well designed, built on, again, established technology. And then the other thing that's really important is that everything's included. And two things I want to highlight that honestly don't always come up in conversations. When you think about protecting cloud apps and cloud data, a lot of organizations would take the Veeam backup from Microsoft 365 product and deploy it in the cloud. Well, one of the things that a lot of organizations don't have on their skill set is a high level of competency in sizing for the cloud because running a protection infrastructure in the cloud is expensive. So bill shock and over provisioning, those types of things really kind of exasperate the cost. You don't have those types of problems here. So when I say everything's included, I truly mean everything's included. Now, this left side, the Veeam delivery of a service, the core components, the operation, the automation is all provisioned for our subscribers of Veeam Data Cloud. But I also want to highlight the most important, again, speaking to the admins in the room, is updates, right? Guess what you won't have to do? You won't have to have a change control in the middle of the night to install Windows updates on your Veeam server. You won't have to have a change control to do application updates on your Veeam server. This is something that's provided to you. So when we think about OpEx benefits, this is a top of mind consideration for people who use the product and then also for organizations who manage teams. This is an immediate benefit that I like the most. The outcome of protecting Microsoft 365 data, sure, great, love it, but also these kind of other benefits that are just going to make our lives easier. And then the other side that I want to highlight is that organizations have some control over their backup, their restore, and their e-discovery capabilities, which is that search topic that Henry was talking about. So I think having this kind of proven offering in the market with everything included really appeals to what organizations are wanting today to protect this critical data. And again, back to the shared responsibility model, this is right there in that conversation. And I've spoken to a lot of organizations who, do I back it up? Do I not? And all it takes is one incident, one legal discovery that you can't sort out. That is when you need to do it. And oddly, that's the one thing that all the cloud providers really agree upon is a shared responsibility model, that the data kind of stays in kind of jurisdiction or under control of the tenant. And so I want to highlight that the future is really here. One of the big highlights of 2024 was, from a platform standpoint of Microsoft 365, was the introduction of Microsoft 365 backup storage. Now, this is a capability that solves really one of the biggest problems, which is kind of getting started. And the thought here is that with this express capability, there was this opportunity to do this fast initial backup. In fact, we talked to a lot of organizations when they really added up everything they had everywhere. It was quite the ingest to get that done. Now, there wasn't a charge from like cloud ingest egress. Don't go there with it. I'm just talking about the gravity of all of that data. Well, Microsoft again recognizes that there is a need for protection of Microsoft 365 data. And now, guess what? There's plumbing, there's APIs to work with to help us get that done. So we're really excited to be the first implemented commercial backup product in the market on Microsoft Backup 365, Microsoft 365 backup storage. Really can help us do high-speed recovery and initial backup seeding. But then also we have our additional capabilities, which we call Flex, and that's really helpful when you kind of consider all four types of data. And again, when I was talking about being both horizontal and vertical with the different data sources, these are the four data sources that we protect in the current offering. I've been pushing the teams to add more. I'm hoping if we're doing this webinar in a couple years, I'll fill up the width of this screen, but this is a great place to start. And if you look at your organization's business, chances are a lot of that data that you need the most is right there. And then we have this packaging option, we call it premium, that kind of helps bundle those two solutions together. But it wouldn't be a Rick Vanover webinar if I didn't do a demo. So I am in a hotel, so apologize for the screen switching situation here. Let's hope that I refresh okay, and I do. What I want to introduce you to is Veeam Data Cloud. So this is my personal environment that I share with my team, and it's being protected by Veeam Data Cloud. Right away, my very first, most important thing to see is that I have 28 users in the account or accounts in the subscription and the tenant. All 28 are protected. Right away, 100% protection. That's the most important real estate of this screen. I love it. Remember I mentioned that organization that had 90,000 users. They had 99 years retention. In this environment, we say 7. I can quickly see that I'm 18 and some change percent of the way there. So I have immediate visibility on my retention. Now, one of the other kind of favorite areas that I like with the Veeam Data Cloud offering for Microsoft 365 is, again, all those different services are visible here. But I also get a quick view of the dare I call it, the naughty list. Who is taking the most storage? Guess who? Of course it's me. I always am the really uh, obnoxious one in the lab. And then Corinne and my team, shout out Eric, is working with Corinne on some stuff. And then also Sophia and Emily. I can clearly see who's using the most storage in our environment because that's important visibility. So before I even get into the protection or the recovery conversation, I have some immediate visibility. Just want to give you also a quick look at those backup policies. I mentioned the Flex and the Express policies. Those are already configured, and like I said, 28 of my users are protected. This is a lab. I probably have more policies than I would need. Just probably haven't cleaned up some demos. That might be my fault. But nonetheless, you have good visibility to some of those policies. And probably one of my favorite things, last part of the demo I want to show everybody. Henry talked about self-service. Now, I know there's a lot going on this screen, but you can get into some self-service and help desk type role configuration across the different types of data. Really, really granular setup here. So you can even make your own roles. You can really give some of that self-service capabilities to other people as well. So really intuitive user interface. I can tell you organizations, when they say yes to Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365, our onboarding teams have a very structured process to assess, do sizing if needed, roll them in, add the policies and a little bit of training. It's a very quick implementation. So this is a quick look at Veeam Data Cloud from Microsoft 365. And probably the last thing I'll show on here is like this activity log. I'll go down here to recent activity, right? This is actually a really good, immediately visible way that I can see what's going on. So I can see that who's doing recovery, myself and Corinne on my team. And I got some activity logs on that because when you think about the criticality of this data, email data, I could be talking about the CEO's mailbox. I need to have visibility on who's touching that in the data recovery scenario. So again, all of this information right here where I need it. I'm a big fan. Veeam Data Cloud is the future here with Veeam, but just a quick look of that. And then my offer to everyone, we did push out the link to the paper that Henry authored, and had some of the findings that he discussed here. But you also, if you want, can get more information about a demo or more information about Veeam Data Cloud. You can go to this QR code. I'll go big on it for a second there. But that'll take you to a form, and everyone's going to get a follow-up email, by the way, with Henry's paper. And I believe a link to replay this webinar will be included as well. All right, so good stuff. The last thing I want to highlight is if you're here, you have some interest in Veeam, some interest in Microsoft 365 data, guess what? We have an event that's going to help you out. VeeamON 2025. Today is the 29th. I will tell you on the 31st, the early registration rate expires. So between now and the end of this month, it's USD 599. That's a really good deal for an in-person event. We try to do a pretty good job at that event. Hope to see you all there. There will be an online experience, no cost for that. Um, Ask me what I'm doing in my afternoons and evenings. I'm working on VeeamON. I know Henry gets the joke. All right, we're going to turn it over to some questions here, and we do have a few. Um, uh, Ed asks, how do I decide what my RPO should be? So, you know, I'm actually going to pull Henry in on this one. How many clients do you have asking you what that should be? I always, you can just go with depends, but I think when it comes to determining an RPO, I think, Henry, we got to look at the business requirements. I mean, at a minimum, 24 hours. But I think when you live in a world of good plumbing, we could entertain 6 hours and quicker RPOs. So it officially depends. But if somebody asks you that question, where do you go from an advisory standpoint, Henry?
Yeah, unfortunately, I go straight to cost.
Oh,
The
okay.
thing is, like, is you got to make the justification. I think a lot of times, as you professionals, in IT, you've got to justify why you're doing these things. And again, I think it's a good thing because you get to hold their feet to the fire too, right? If you say, okay, we can give you a really short RPO, RTO, we can make sure you're not losing that much data. It's going to cost you this much. They need to understand that because then again, that's why we talk so much about granularity, granularity, granularity. Not everybody's going to need to have the super platinum, not going to lose data, 100%, everything's backed up plan. Again, especially maybe it's account to test dev account or something that's just not that important where I could lose 6 hours. And then again, if it's something like maybe it's something highly transactional or something where you're keeping all your sales information or something very very important on those files, you're not going to want to miss a minute. So
Yeah.
again, I think what the important thing is to make sure you're laying out to your organization before you're going to procurement and talking about these things. Hey, we can do these are the different prices, these are the different things. You tell me how much you're willing to lose, and your compliance teams will also have their say as to uh, they can't lose any data or they can lose blah 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 data. It's not a decision one person makes in an organization. It's something you have to go to the organization and really find out in terms of business value, and also unfortunately it comes down to money too. I mean, all of us, we're not running around with tons and tons of money. We need to make
Right.
sure every dollar we're spending is getting maximum value. So, to me, I like that part of it because you can hold the organization's feet to the fire and make sure you're setting the expectations correctly by starting with that cost issue.
Well, I'll go back to flexibility, the word of the day, in that we can also entertain implementations with Veeam that maybe some business units need a much tighter RPO, can do, and then others don't. Hey, can do. That's also important. Steve has a question. Is Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365 available on AWS? Currently, Steve, it is powered in, just full disclosure, where are we running this? It is running in Azure, but this is a Veeam provided solution. It is running in Azure. We have multi-cloud ambitions here. Stay tuned. Nothing to share just now, but there will be a day where we can share more. Steve has a really good question, and I'm going to jump back not to the demo. I'm going to go to L Google here. Veeam Data Cloud pricing. One of the things I want to highlight is that pricing is all included, and one of the cool things you can just go to straight away. I think that was Sean's question, sorry, not Steve, on this one. What is the pricing? You can find it straight away. So it's right on the Veeam website. When you think about first party cloud offerings, you really have to be ultra transparent with the pricing. And the one thing I'll say is that this is the starting price. When you consume through the channel, some of the games they play, you may be able to push. And also, one step further, if you, as an organization attending this webinar, if you have a subscription to one of the top tier analyst firms, one of the services they provide are quote reviews. Henry, I don't think that's your area, but I think you have colleagues that do that. Is that right?
I
Or
don't
bid
look at that,
reviews.
unfortunately, but
Oh, I know it's not you,
it
but I
was,
know analyst firms do, I think.
yeah, depending on the different firms, yes, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of them. So your mileage may vary, but I know a lot of the analyst firms will do quote review services to say, hey, a similar org was getting a different price. You can do that type of thing. So you might not have known that, but now you do. All right. Let me look in the chat for any questions and see if I missed any. I'm on like a weird setup here. I got a trash can holding up my camera, but anything else you want to add as a closing thought, Henry?
Yeah, I think we're all getting set for the year. Any hints you have in terms of what we could be thinking about for Vmon that
Oh,
that
well,
won't get you in trouble?
my boss Dave likes to say you can do anything you want on your last day of work.
Last day.
So what I can tell you is it is ultra clear at Veeam that Veeam Data Cloud is a priority. And it's reasonable to expect we're going to showcase some of the capabilities of that priority. We're also not going to abandon Veeam Data Platform. I was just speaking with Anton Gostev this morning about some ideas for Razzle Dazzle fun demos. So stay tuned. We're going to have, we'll call it portfolio parity that we will bring to the event. Both engines will be represented for sure. And Mark asked the best question. How did Veeam get its name? Holy buckets. That's a great question, Mark. So if you look at Veeam right here, and then if you also go back to the internet, uh, Veeam old logo, if you go back to Veeam over the years, you'll see, okay, this is actually perfect. We got all four of them right here. Right when Veeam started, this was our logo, this two color, capital E, lowercase a. That drove me crazy. Okay. And then we moved over to this one, the kind of NASA looking font, but we went lowercase a, capital A, so still mixed case. But here we are, V. Doesn't answer the question, how do we get our name? Well, it's honestly, it's in intentionally confusing virtual machine. We made a word out of it. And so back in 2006, when we started, our very first product was sizing and configuration estimate and file transfer for early days VMware environments. And by calling it Veeam, you were kind of intentionally associating it with the VM that you were interacting. Fast forward to 2008, the first backup product. Fast forward to now, Veeam's the most deployed M365 solution in the world and one of the biggest backup providers in the world. That's 16, 18 years of history, real close and tight. So probably need to work on that story. But anyways, Henry, thank you so much for joining us here on the webinar today.
Thanks, Rick. It was a pleasure joining you, and look forward to seeing you on the road.
And a big thank you to all the team who helped bring this content to us. We had Edward, we had Chase, we had Raluca, and others in the Veeam team around the world, as well as Henry's colleagues at S&P Global, so and Jessica as well. Big thanks to everyone else. Thanks for watching, everyone. That concludes our webinar, and look for that follow-up email for the recording and the buyer's guide.
Thanks.